I think about performance in kind of simple terms. What are your values? What are the key behaviors in your life that are evidence of those values? And how can you create as little space as possible between those values and behaviors? And when those things are in alignment, I would say that somebody is optimizing in terms of their performance.
Welcome to today's video, all about how to perform at higher levels and to feel even better doing so. I'm Maya, and I'm here with a very special guest, and on a personal note, a very good friend of mine, Kevin Coale. Kevin, how are you?
I'm well. Life is good. Thank you for having me. It's such a joy to be here with you.
I feel the same. And go ahead and share a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm calling in from Davidson, North Carolina. So I am just outside of Charlotte, about 30 minutes. So hello from Davidson. If folks have heard about Davidson, usually it's because of Steph Curry, a basketball player who played great basketball here and helped put the town on the map. But I'm a performance coach like you, and I do essentially three things. So I work one-on-one with individuals and I work with teams to help them optimize. We can talk about what that means if we want. But that's one thing. The second thing is I'm a founding coach for 2 AI companies. So one is Anya, which is a storytelling app for kids. Our thesis is that we're going to try to use AI to help kids learn social emotional lessons, things like resilience. And then the other company is Cassette, where we're using AI to help people who love music create their own beats. The third thing that I do is I get to travel around and give talks, trainings, and seminars to industry leaders to help them optimize, help them perform better. Most of the folks that I support in coaching are in the world of frontier tech. So AI, crypto, Web3. That's where I do a lot of my coaching, but not all. So I've supported folks in law and medicine. I had a founder, a fitness founder recently. She was on the Today Show. She was featured there, which was a cool moment for her, proud moment for me as her coach. Before I got into coaching, I was in education. So I spent about 15 years working in schools, took me from Atlanta to Alexandria, Virginia, Los Angeles, and then North Carolina, Davidson, North Carolina, where I live with my partner and our kiddo, who's going to be 5 in November. I'm a proud girl dad. I think that's kind of a summary of what I've done. But I'll also add part of my background is in sports. I played a million sports growing up. My dad was my first performance coach and ended up playing lacrosse all the way through college, won a national championship with my teammates in 2006. And so I have a background in education, background in high performing sports. And those are things I bring to the table as a coach now when I think about supporting my clients as well as possible. Spent many years thinking about what people need to learn best and perform best or play best. And so those are important things to me, things I bring to my work with my clients now.
You're doing amazing work and living out your purpose, Kevin. Truly, it's no surprise that you are living in the same town where Steph Curry came from, right? Talk about optimal performance.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's cool. You hear stories about him just shooting all day long in the neighborhood at different hoops around the neighborhood. And so I think a lot of his success he has earned by just putting the hay in the barn, repetition. I mean, we talk about performance, like performance is one part, like what happens in that moment when it really matters. But a huge part of the equation is all of the stuff that gets inputted into the formula before you get to the output moment.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm curious for you to share with us, what does optimal performance mean to you? Because most of us, when we think of performance, we think of talent, right? Someone like Steph Curry who has that talent at that point. And sometimes we think, I can't get there. We may have those sort of limiting beliefs. But what is it about optimal performance that most people look over?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to take a slightly different angle, I think, maybe than most. I would say, I think coaching is fundamentally about the performance of the client. Something should be different by the end of the conversation, the end of the engagement. One part of it is we talk about performance, like what is different or what would you like to be different from where you are now versus where you want to get to. If I'm performing well in a basketball game, like what's going to be different is by the end, the last whistle, the buzzer, we will have won the game, hopefully, or I'll have given my best effort. I think about performance in kind of simple terms. What are your values? What are the key behaviors in your life that are evidence of those values? And how can you create as little space as possible between those values and behaviors? And when those things are in alignment, I would say that somebody is optimizing in terms of their performance. So I'm performing well as a dad, just to give an example. If I say family is the most important thing, then what are the key behaviors there? Well, I'm showing up for my daughter. This is a true story. So a week ago, it was my turn to pick her up from dance, and I just mismanaged time. But, like, damn if I'm gonna be late to picking her up from something that is important to her, because I really wanted to see the very end where she gets to leap over this TheraBand, which they call the river. And so I realized this about, like, halfway through my mile-long walk that I'm not gonna make it, and so I'm wearing what I'm wearing now, like a shirt, jeans, and I start taking off in a run, and I made it. And so that, like, when I think about performance, like, that's fundamentally what I'm talking about, just alignment between values and behaviors. Is there consistency there? Is there overlap? If there isn't, I think then that's an invitation to reexamine, like, what's going on. Um, she was a little surprised to see me show up all sweaty. But that's, that's showing up for my family is important to me. That's a value.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something for us all to learn from because when we get in touch with our heart and what's really most important to us, then at that point we're more coherent. And when we're more coherent and we're in our hearts, then we're able to almost take the horse blinders off and think out of the box. So, most people in that situation, they might think, oh, I won't make it in time. I'll try and make it up to her next time. But you got in touch with what's most important to you, that value. And then it's like, how do I get from where I am now to where I want to go in the best way possible, in the way that serves not only myself, but of course, my daughter, someone who I care about and love a lot. So I really acknowledge you for that. And that's something we can all learn from.
Yeah, I mean, that's my take on performance, but I'm curious to hear, how would you describe it in your work, or as a person in the world? What does peak performance look like for you?
Thank you for asking. And for those of you who don't know, Kevin and I met a few months ago. It all started in Nashville when the two of us met. We studied with the coach Marshall Goldsmith, and Kevin and I already started talking about optimization a few months ago. And in our conversations together, a lot of the gap between where we are now and where we want to go comes down to our state. What state are we in? For example, when you were still at home and your daughter's at dance, what is it that made sure that you can get to your daughter's dance class as soon as possible in the way that's the highest and best for everyone involved? Was you got into that peak state. Physically, you were running for it. Mentally, you believed that you could. Emotionally, you were flexible and you also felt that sense of care, but non attachment in that I'll try my best. And if I don't make it, that's okay. And spiritually, of course, you are connected to your purpose, to your values of what's important to you in that moment. So, in our conversations together, we've defined state as the combination of our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual state. So, Kevin, tell us a little bit more about what is that optimal state? What does that mean to you?
I think optimization for me fundamentally is that resonance between, or that in syncness between the things that really matter to me and what it looks like in my life. Think of it this way: if I were to give you a list of the things that matter most to me, Maya, and you were to be a fly on the wall and follow me around for a week, how often would you be checking off those things? Sometimes, most of the time, hopefully pretty much all the time. When those things don't get checked off, I think that's an invitation to figure out what's jamming up the system here. I could be saying that something that I think really matters to me, I could be saying that thing really matters to me, but you don't get to see that in the way I live my life. So, to come back to the example that I gave you at the beginning, one of the first things that I noticed, we talk about physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. One of the first things that I noticed was physical piece. Like, I experienced nervousness, like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to do the thing I said I was going to do. I said I was going to pick you up at the end of dance. I had a coach back in high school talked about, I still remember this now, you know, 25 years later, that nervousness and excitement are two closely related emotions. I think of them as like two houses on the same street. And so if I'm able to coach myself through that moment of, I'm feeling some nervousness. Why am I feeling some nervousness? I'm feeling nervousness because I may not be able to do the thing I said I was going to do. How can I then channel that into excitement? One way I can do that is just get on my horse and start running. And it's going to look a little weird. It's going to be kind of uncomfortable. I'm going to get there sweaty, but that's a way in which I can do that. I can focus that energy in a more productive manner. So to answer your question about like how do we get into that state? For me, one of the first things that usually it's like the body sends out a flare to signal something's going on here. This is important. Pay attention. I had a conversation recently with a remarkable athlete. She's going to be a guest on my podcast, The Delta. Her name is Naomi Metzger, and she is a many time champion in Great Britain for the triple jump, which is a very difficult event. And we were talking about state, and she said, one of the first things that I notice is like my breath change. My heart rate goes up. I start sweating. And I need to remind myself that that's just a signal that my body is sending up that this thing that I'm doing is important to me and I want to do it well. And we have a choice in that moment to think about, oh no, this isn't going to go well. I'm not going to beat my time. I'm not going to be able to jump as far as I want to. I'm not going to be able to pick up my daughter. We also have an opportunity to think differently about it, ask ourselves better questions. So I think for me, the fundamental building block there is that physical piece. That's usually how I experience it.
And nowadays, so many of us almost externalize from our body, and we forget to really take a moment to pause because, as you mentioned, Kevin, our body will usually send up those signals, those flares of, hey, pay attention. What's going on in my chest here? Usually there's a message there. There's something for us to decode and to learn from. So that way we can get from where we are right now to where we want to go even more quickly and in a way that serves us and those around us even better too. So we talked a little bit about the physical part of the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. Let's talk a little bit about the emotional piece.
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan of folks like Amy Edmondson and Brene Brown. At least I'll speak from my perspective. They have done more for me in terms of like decoding my own emotions and giving me language to talk about them. I think in a way that's helped make me a better human, a better partner, better dad, better coach. So I guess the first part is just what sort of vocabulary are we using? Am I able to say like I'm happy or I'm sad and that's it? Or am I able to use more complex language to describe more complex feelings that I may be having? You know, am I joyful? Am I stressed? Am I flooded because of like all of the stimuli coming into my system and I'm shutting down? I think being able to name some of the complexity around human emotion is really important. Have you seen the movie Inside Out?
My gosh, yes.
Okay.
1 and 2.
1 and 2. Yes. Yes. Okay. So I've seen both as well. And, I think one of the cool things that's happening in schools now is kids I've seen start talking about emotions sooner and sooner, like naming the emotion. Here's the emotion I'm feeling. Here's why. I'm upset because you took my toy. I think that's a really profound shift. My daughter, I'll go back to another story. She was sad the other night and we could see that she was sad. I said, "Do you wanna talk about what's going on?" She goes, "No, I'm feeling emotions right now. I don't wanna talk about them." And so that's a fundamental piece, just to put a point on it or punctuate it. Being able to say, "Here's how I'm feeling in this emotional state, like, I'm excited to be here with you. I'm curious about what question is coming next. I'm reflective about the things that you're adding and saying already in the conversation. I'm grateful for this chance to connect." Being able to name those things helps me put them on the map. And when I can, there's no version of getting to where I want to go without figuring out where I am first.
Exactly. There's such a beauty in taking a moment to label how we're feeling. And sometimes it means expanding our emotional vocabulary a little bit to be able to pinpoint more specifically how we're feeling. Like, am I experiencing those jitters in my chest because I'm nervous or because I'm excited or because it's a mix of the two?
Yeah.
So we've got to be able to name it. And sometimes it's not all of us, right? When we look at the movie Inside Out, it may be parts of us. There's this framework that I use with many of my clients called internal family systems, which actually
Mm.
one of the board members of internal family systems helped to develop Inside Out. And
Is
so
that
there's a
right?
lot of correlation there. And it's working with parts of us. Like maybe when your daughter was feeling all those emotions and she was sitting down the other night, maybe a part of her was feeling angry, a part of her was feeling sad, a part of her was feeling nervous, maybe a part of her was
Yeah,
feeling excited or calm. And so it's important to also recognize that sometimes our emotions aren't all of us. But if we take a moment to unblend for a second, we can recognize more specifically what are the mix of emotions that are showing up.
yeah.
And is it all of me or a part of me that's feeling that right now?
I think that's a great question. I wanna add too, I don't necessarily believe that we get to choose the emotions that we experience, but what we do get to choose is how we respond to those emotions. And if we're gonna do that, then I feel that it is critical for us to create just a little bit of daylight between the emotional experience that we have and the response that we can influence. If we can find ways to create a wedge and get some more space in there, and I love your question, like, is this a part of me? Is this all of me? Bringing some curiosity to that is gonna help create some distance for, like, my daughter. I mean, I'm 39. I don't know if I've ever said to somebody, "I'm feeling my emotions right now, but I don't wanna talk about it." Pretty freaking cool that she's doing that. I think your example is a great one. How can we introduce more questions like that for folks? So it's part of the language, and then it becomes part of the experience.
For your daughter, imagine there's so much wisdom and being able to just sit in that for a little bit. So we talked a little bit about labeling our emotions and creating that awareness. Now, what are some ways that we can actually shift and reset our state to self-regulate? What are some other options that you do with yourself, that you practice with clients, that you know are best practices for some of the athletes that you've coached and the high
Yeah.
performers?
So this one's free, and it's pretty basic, but sometimes I'll get on with a client and I can tell they're in a tough state. Maybe they're pretty upset about something that happened, and they're just really feeling it. I can hear it in their voice, I can see it in their body language. You've probably had experiences similar to this. So I might ask, just tell me out of curiosity, have you had a chance to get outside today? Most of the time, the answer is no. And so I will say, I'm going to talk to you in 15 minutes. I want you to get up, get away from the computer. I mean, eh, these people have been, hunched over like this. It is hard as hell to feel good about the world when this is like the orientation we have. So get up, go walk around, run around, get your heart rate up, feel the sunlight or the air, the fresh air, and then we'll come back. And generally what happens in pretty much all those cases is they come back and they say, "Thank you so much. That was helpful." Doesn't necessarily resolve the problems that they had 15 minutes before, but it helps shift the emotional state just enough so the door is a little wider for them to be open to seeing things differently and doing things differently. And I think that for me, that's the algorithm of coaching, working with somebody to help them help provoke awareness and shift behavior. And if I'm locked down emotionally, that ain't happening. No way. I'm just going to be the thing I'm pissed off now about is I'm going to be pissed off about at the end of our call, unless I can help provoke in a good way, greater awareness. And I think this is you and I are talking in two dimensions here. One easy way to do this is you want to shift your perspective, literally shift your perspective. Go outside. I mean, if you can move around and walk around, that's great. You're changing your perspective constantly, but also just bring your head up, look out. I think it's a subtle reminder that the world is a lot bigger than this.
And there's such an empowering piece to that too with your clients because you're not necessarily saying something for them to change. It's inviting them to do something for themselves.
Yeah.
So they know that anytime, anywhere, they can step outside, they can get in that exercise, they can get that sunshine. And when our state shifts, our emotional state shifts, then our cognitive state shifts. Just like when you connected with your value of family, with your heart, your state shifted. And then from there, you were able to access a more creative solution of what if I were to just run? Yeah, I'm wearing my work clothes, but let's do it. Why didn't I just run? And I'm sure that your daughter appreciated that too. And I can speak on a personal note when even last week, it was one of those days where I just woke up and there was just something, like just woke up on the wrong side of the bed, like just some
Yeah.
stuck energy, something was going on. And I had an open morning, and so did my boyfriend. So I took him and we actually went for a hike on one of the mountains near us. And I can tell you, when I walked out the door and when I walked back in the door, I was in a completely different state and my whole day
Yeah.
shifted. So this stuff is so powerful. And what you mentioned about perspective as well. In NLP, there's a state called the learning awareness state,
Yeah.
where we literally do just that. We find, and even the listeners now, if it's safe and appropriate, they can practice this. They find one point on the wall in front of them at about eye level, and then they just begin to expand their perspective. So
Mm.
expanding to about 180 degrees. And then you can even wiggle your fingers and start to notice that maybe you're able to notice things beyond what you even thought. Maybe you can actually even notice what's going on behind you to some degree. And
Yeah.
so that just allows us to expand our perspective. And then we come back into what we're doing with a broader perspective and a greater focus.
I That's a great technique. I wanna go back to something because it feels too important to jump over. You woke up on the wrong side of the bed, and you were, like, feeling feelings, and then you were like, "No, we're gonna you and your boyfriend, like, we're gonna go hike, we're gonna get out of here." I think something this is what I have seen working with really high performing individuals. Everybody has got a wrong side of the bed. Everybody does. Like, I have yet to meet a person that is able to perform at their peak all the time. What I think distinguishes really high performers from other individuals is their ability to navigate the thing that you're describing. Matt Mashari, who's an excellent coach, talks about fear and anger giving bad advice. And when we're able to tap into that, a break open strategy can be do the opposite of what fear and anger is telling you to do. So fear and anger may be able to convince you to stay in your place, or we don't need to get up or whatever, but you're able to say, no, this is, I know that I'm stuck. And the only chance of me getting unstuck is getting out that door. So I think for folks listening, that's what I would say. If fear and anger is part of the equation, then get better at finding strategies that work for you, whether it's staring at the wall and expanding your perspective, going out for a hike, breathing through it. Whatever's working for you, get better at that because that's going to help unlock higher performance. Because high performing individuals are great at that process. Not perfect at all. We're all human, but they're great at this is what I'm feeling. How do I navigate through it?
And then our conversations, we tie back to just that. Peak performers, they've got the talent. Look at LeBron James, you look at Steph Curry, they've got the talent. They've put in the hours. What is it that truly sets them apart is their state, their ability to prepare for, recover from, and adapt in the face of stress, challenge, and adversity. And when the fear and the anger show up, it's also important to be curious, right? To get to know those parts of us and say, okay, why is this showing up? First, I labeled it. I noticed that it's fear, anger. And then what is this trying to tell me? Is there a message that this part of me is trying to tell me? So that way I can learn from it and make sure that it doesn't happen again. And that's how we continue to grow and evolve as well. And so a lot of what we've discussed so far in the physical, emotional states also relate to our mental state.
Yeah.
So our mental energy, our ability to focus and make good decisions and be flexible and incorporate many different perspectives as well. What is it that your mental state means to you?
I think you said it, the ability to focus. There's 2 parts of that. Like, what am I focusing on and what am I not focusing on? I'll give you an example here. Okay, so I used to play 1,000 years ago, I used to play competitive golf, and I went to see a sports psychologist because golf, I don't know if you've ever played. I think golf, I've played a lot of sports. I think golf is the hardest sport out there. And here's why. In in pretty much every sport that I've experienced, if I'm not making my shots, I can hustle. Like I can work hard. I can play better defense. And usually that will help me shift my state. Well, if I'm not hitting my 4 iron well, there's not a whole lot I can do about it. Like, I just put that thing back in the bag and then revisit when I get to the practice, session on the range. So, I think golf is incredibly challenging mentally. So I was working with a sports psychologist, and I was trying to get the ball to go straight in the fairway, which is a pretty important part of playing golf well. And the sports psychologist said, "Okay, well, where do you want the ball to land?" And I said, "Just anywhere in the fairway would be great because then I'm giving myself like a much better chance at the next shot hitting the green." And he goes, "Your answer is not focused enough. I want you to look down the fairway, pick a tree. Now pick a branch on that tree. Now pick a leaf on that tree and aim for that leaf." My ability to hit the shot in the fairway, did I hit it every single time in the fairway? Of course not. But my ability to hit it more consistently in the fairway went through the roof because I was focusing my mental energy on something much more specific. And so I have used this practice. I used it as a golfer years ago. I use this practice now as a performance coach with my clients. Let's get really specific on what success looks like. Because once we can do that, we can focus on that. We can focus our energy on that. And at the same time, we're not focusing on our energy on all that noise that we could potentially focus it on.
Said that where attention goes, energy flows.
That's it.
So when your attention is on the leaf, then all the energy is focused toward that. So for the listener right now, where is your attention most of the days? Is it on what you want specifically, or is it on what you don't want? Right? Because what
Mm.
if I told you right now, don't think of an elephant wearing a top hat, Kevin. Do not think of an elephant wearing a top. What do
Yeah.
you think of?
Yeah. I'm thinking of an elephant wearing a top hat.
That's right. And
Yeah.
so what the same goes for I don't want to be in debt. Whatever happens, I just don't want to be in debt.
Yeah.
We want to focus instead on what we do want, right? I don't want to hit the golf ball out of bounds. Well, where do you want to hit it instead? In the fairway, at the tree, at the branch, or at the leaf? So it's so important to get specific on what we want. And that way, when we visualize that and feel the emotions that are associated with that, we believe that we can do it. And it's part of our purpose, our values, then that's where our energy is going to
Yeah.
flow. And it's a given, it's already written in that sense.
That's it. And as a coach, I think you have a great opportunity to make sure energy is flowing in that direction.
And for those who are listening, whether you have a coach or don't have a coach, I invite you to consider who can you be that person for
Yeah.
and who's that person for you? And maybe that's the same person. You can create some sort of accountability system to where you ask each other what's really most important to one another and you help each other stay focused on that leaf in a sense and make sure that your energy is flowing in that direction.
Our mentor, Marshall, you mentioned earlier, has been asking daily questions for decades. Like it's a pretty low fidelity system that's highly effective. Come up with a question based on a value of yours. Did you do that thing today? Did I prioritize my family today? No, I didn't. Okay, I'm going to get better at it tomorrow. I think accountability is huge. We have to have systems in place that hold us accountable, that we help construct, that hold us accountable for the things that really matter in our life.
Exactly. And that ties into a powerful tool that listeners can already begin to implement. Right? It only takes a few minutes a day and it helps them to connect with their spiritual state. So before we get into the questions and how people can begin to implement that, what does spiritual state mean to you, Kevin?
I mean, for me, it means plugging into something bigger than myself. And that's not, I don't know if that's a great definition, but I think when you say spiritual, I think about, I'm literally looking up, like I think about scale. So we attend a practice of ours. We attend the Quaker meeting here in town, just as like our spiritual practice. And if you haven't attended a Quaker meeting before, it is an hour of silence. It's an hour of reflection. That does not happen often in the world that I live in, at least, where there is an hour of adults sitting around not saying anything, but reflecting, creating space for answers to come in. My Quaker friends like to say, um, "The way will open," and that happens when there is that space that I was talking about. So I guess there are a couple of things just to go back to your question. Like for me, The spiritual plane is a bigger one. It's about being plugged into something that's bigger than me and probably bigger than something I can fully imagine or wrap my brain around. But it's also the reflective practice, like weaving back through the what matters most to me. Am I creating space for answers to come in and answers that are going to help me live a better, more meaningful life? So that's what it means to me. I'm curious, like, I want to kick this one back to you. I'm keen to hear what comes up for you when you think about spiritual.
I think at the essence of it, what you're sharing is a connection to something outside of yourself that's powerful.
Mm,
And that something outside is a mirror to something inside, right? Because I imagine when you're connected to that something, when you're looking up, you're really connected to that in that moment of silence, and all of the other people around you are connected in that same sense. There's that energy, you can feel it in the room. Then you're also connected to the best part of who you are,
mm,
oftentimes, I would imagine. And so that spiritual plane could also be our connection to our values, what's important
mm,
to us, to our purpose, to our heart, our own intuition, to understanding other people's perspectives and being curious about that and finding some common ground, some common way to connect. And so spiritual can take on many forms and it can be within us and without us in that sense.
mhm,
So tell
mm.
us now all about the daily questions as a tool that people can already simply, easily begin to implement into their own life as a way to check in and reflect on their physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual states. So that way they can live in that more of that optimal state and recognize when they're not to be able to shift.
Yeah, I think daily questions are I think questions in general, but I do wanna back up for a second. I think one of the things great teachers get this right, great schools get this right, but I think unfortunately so many students go through the school system and are taught something a little bit different in that we over-index on the answer and under-index on the importance of asking a question. So many students think, "Oh, the smartest thing I can do is just study for really well for what I think the essay question is gonna be, and then, somebody else has asked the question, I'm just gonna answer it." But it is so much more powerful for folks to have to come up with invent their own big question and then answer it. So that's sort of like I wanna offer that preface that I think and I saw this all the time. Great teachers, great schools challenge students to ask questions for themselves. Marshall Goldsmith has been doing this, number one executive coach on the planet, been doing this for years, working with his clients. You know, they talk through what matters most, come up with a list of questions, and he will call his clients and ask them those questions daily questions. Client says yes, no. If it's a yes, that gets tallied. If it's a no, it's tallied. And then they assess it. They talk about it. Here's, like I said, here's where you said you wanted to be. Here's where you were. That's in my experience, that's all people need reflected back to them. They take it from there. People are going to be way harder on themselves if they're coachable and plugged into the process than I need to be. They're going to recognize that something needs to shift. Here's how I do it in my own coaching practice. So I implement Marshall's daily questions, but I do it a little bit differently. I tie it back to optimization. We talked about that at the jump. So optimization is alignment between, I believe, values and your behaviors. So we talk about that. We do values clarification. What matters most to you? People come up with a short list of their values. Okay, what are the key behaviors that a third party adjudicating this could say, yes, no, definitely, these things did or did not happen. So then they identify behaviors. So let's say family is a priority. What is the behavior there showing up for my family? Okay, the people I love. Then a daily question I might ask myself based off of that behavior is, did I show up for my family today? It's a values based question. It's a reflection of something that's important to me. And if it, when they've done the studies on this, most people don't make it 2 weeks with this exercise. It is so difficult. But if you can bring yourself back to yes, your you bring yourself back to the thing that really matters. Okay, so I didn't do those things that I said I wanted to do yesterday. How can I get back on track today? That's all we're talking about. One of One of my favorite coaches, Damien Goldvarg, talks, we're not human beings, we're human becomings. I love that idea. Human becomings. Like, okay, am I becoming the type of person, the type of leader, parent, partner, spouse, kid that I want to be? You know? And how can I negotiate that more in the direction that I feel best about over time? So that's how I implement daily questions. I think it's a really simple strategy. It's free, hard as hell. But if you're up for a challenge, if folks listening are up for a challenge, this is a great one to start with.
Yeah, it's so true, right? Because these questions, it can be hard because sometimes our perspective can narrow and we can focus only on what's in front of us and really get into that hunched position and do whatever thing is going on in our current reality. But when we step outside for a moment and even think forward 50 years from now, 60, 70, 80 years from now, when we look back and we look at how we lived our life, how happy were we?
Yeah.
How much were we with our family? How much time did we spend outdoors and whatever values that are important to us? So it's giving ourselves a gift of setting aside 2 minutes a day just to do that check.
Yeah.
And I love that you distilled it into such a simple process. It's 3 steps. 1, get clear on your values. What's most important to you? 2, get clear on what are the behaviors that stem from those values. So, for example, one of my values is eating healthy. One of the behaviors is making sure that I go to the farmer's market on the weekend to be able to get those healthy, fresh ingredients. And if not, to go to some grocery store and get some healthy ingredients and to cook healthy meals throughout the week. And step 3 is
Mm.
to create a question based off of that behavior and to continually check up. And that ties back to the accountability piece that Kevin, we were talking about earlier in that sense of finding someone who also has questions and to
Yeah.
give each other that gift, to set aside 3 minutes a day, every day to check in with one another.
I'll offer another one. I think this is a question that is, for me, worth its weight in gold. So I used to work with an unbelievable, she was a colleague, she was our school counselor, therapist, her name is Sarah, and she used to ask this question, "Will this matter in 20 years?" The thing I'm experiencing right now, will it truly matter in 20 years? Or to take a part of a question that you asked earlier, is part of this important in 20 years from now? Is the whole thing important 20 years from now? Most of the time in my experience, the thing that I'm stressed about is not something that's gonna matter in 20 years. I probably won't even remember it. So, the questions have the capacity to shift and provoke awareness for us, and especially the ones that we invent. If we have a byline on the question, there's more purchase in the process in my experience. So, yeah, I'd be curious if folks in the comment listening to this, I'd be really interested to see what their process is. What is your value? What is the key behavior that's an indicator of that value? And then what's a question you might ask yourself? Because the other cool thing that you mentioned, Maya, is eating healthy. You and I may agree on that. It might show up in our life differently. And that's the beautiful thing about human beings too, that just because we, we may share this thing is really important, this really matters, but what it looks like when it gets expressed in our life may be a little bit different, which I think is amazing.
And that ties back to that spiritual flexibility, that spiritual openness
Yeah.
of accepting, being curious about other people's perceptions, their own opinions, and then tolerating that and accepting in whatever way feels right for us. And of
Yes.
course, to get clear, I love that you touched on this, Kevin. To get clear on our values, we've got to change our state. If we're in that hunched over, depleted state where we're not optimized in our physical, emotional, mental, spiritual states, then how could we possibly get clear on in our hearts what's most important? And so I'm
Yes.
sure for whoever's listening, they have their own ways of changing their state, whether that's doing some heart meditation, going for a walk, getting workout and getting some sunshine, whatever that is. But you've got to make sure you're in that optimal state to be able to get clear on those values.
Okay. So the elite athlete, Naomi Metzger, that I was mentioning earlier, the triple jump, I think, lasts less than 10 seconds. If somebody can check me on that, but certainly less than 10 seconds. I asked her how long. So that's how long the performance piece of it is. I said, "How long to what else is in that wood pile for you?" And she goes, "Well, my warm up takes an hour." So think about that for a second. The warm up takes an hour. The performance piece takes less than 10 seconds. Certainly true of the fastest people on the planet. They're running 100 meters in under 10 seconds. So I want to mention that to say This is hard work. But when you do that work intentionally, what it means is in those moments that really matter, it comes through.
And for those
Yeah.
listening, just imagine, like actually take a moment and imagine a year from now and you lived out your days in alignment with what's most important to you. And emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally, and all the different planes, you are checking in with yourself. Of course, it's a practice and it's like riding a bike. You continue to evolve and get better and better and better. But just imagine what's possible if you take those few minutes a day to do that work. So thank you so much, Kevin, for sharing your wisdom and for bringing your own physical, emotional, mental, spiritual energy here with us today. And tell us, how can we learn more about you? How can we discover your podcast and all the
Yeah.
amazing work that you're doing out there?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Let me just say thank you for the conversation. If folks wanna connect, I'm at, Coach Cole in the social media realms that I exist in. So LinkedIn, X, and then also Farcaster. It's a Web3 social media platform. It's probably where I do most of my camping out. My website is kevincole.xyz. And then I have a podcast, The Delta, where we talk about the relationship between leadership and change, what it means for individuals and teams looking to optimize. So I'm excited to announce that. And right now, you can find that at pods.media. So you don't have to have a crypto wallet. You can mint it for a couple bucks if you want to collect it. I really appreciate that for folks that have done that. But you can also listen to it without a crypto wallet, which is great. I think the folks at Pods are doing amazing work.
Absolutely. And I'll include all of those links in the description box below as well for you to learn more and explore. Kevin and I do dive deeper into each of these physical, emotional, mental, spiritual dimensions. And we talk more about what optimal performance really means and the optimal state as well, along with some practical, actionable tools that you can begin to implement into your daily life in our upcoming article together. And you can find that in the description box below as well. So thank you so much to those of you listening. Thank you, Kevin, and we'll see you in the next one.